The courtroom was dead silent. You could hear the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Everyone was watching her, the teenage girl standing in the middle of the room. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was strong. She pointed straight at the man sitting at the defendant's table, the man who had hurt her for years. Her own father. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. Not in front of the man who had taken away her childhood. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to keep going. "He used to lock me in the basement for days," she said, her voice shaking. "No food. No water. Just darkness." The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, gripped the edge of her desk. Her lips pressed together as if she was trying to control her emotions. The jurors looked horrified. A few people in the audience gasped. But the girl wasn't done. He would punish me if I cried," she continued. "If I begged, he'd laugh." Her voice broke. "And when I finally told someone, he said no one would believe me, that he was a respected man." Her father sat there, stone-faced, cold, as if none of this mattered. Then, the judge did something no one expected. She took off her glasses. Her hands were shaking, and to everyone's shock, tears streamed down her face. The courtroom gasped. No one had ever seen Judge Reynolds cry. The silence was unbearable. The teenage girl stood there, frozen. Even she hadn't expected this. What was going to happen next? It all started 1 year ago. Back then, she was just a scared 15-year-old girl with no voice. No hope. Her name was Olivia Bennett. And for as long as she could remember, she lived in fear. Fear of the man who was supposed to love her. Her father, Charles Bennett, was known in town as a respected businessman. To the outside world, he was charming, generous, even kind. He donated money to charities, helped struggling families, and always had a smile for the cameras. But behind closed doors, he was a monster. It started when Olivia was little. Small things. A slap when she spoke out of turn. A yank of her hair when she spilled something. But as she got older, it became worse. By the time she was 12, the punishments were unbearable. He had rules. Strict rules. She had to be home before dark. She had to speak only when spoken to. And she was never, ever allowed to tell anyone what happened inside their house. If she did, there would be consequences. She learned to stay silent. Until the day everything changed. It was a cold November night. Olivia sat on her bed, staring at the tiny crack in the ceiling. She had memorized every inch of that room. The chipped paint, the way the wooden floor creaked near the door. She heard the front door slam. Her father was home. Her stomach twisted. She knew what was coming. She had failed a math test that day, and he would find out. Her hands trembled as she pulled the blanket over her legs. Maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't come upstairs. But then, heavy footsteps pounded against the stairs. She squeezed her eyes shut. The door burst open. He stood there, his eyes wild with anger. She barely had time to brace herself before he grabbed her arm and yanked her out of bed. "You're an embarrassment," he hissed, his breath reeking of whiskey. "I work my fingers to the bone for you, and this is how you repay me?" She tried to explain. "Dad, but he wasn't listening. He never listened." He shoved her. Hard. She hit the wall with a thud. Pain exploded in her shoulder, but she didn't cry. She had learned not to cry. "You don't deserve to live in this house," he spat. "You're useless." And then, he dragged her out of the room. Down the stairs. Into the basement. It was pitch black. Cold. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. She was alone. Again. She curled into a ball, her body aching, her heart pounding. This wasn't the first time. But something about this night felt different. This time, she wasn't sure if he would ever let her out. Hours passed. Maybe days. She had no food. No water. She felt weak. Lightheaded. And then, she heard something. A voice. Soft. Gentle. Olivia. Her heart leaped. Someone had found her. But who? And would they be able to save her before it was too late? Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure if she was dreaming or if someone was really there. The voice came again, softer this time. "Olivia, are you in there?" She forced herself to sit up, her body screaming in pain. Her throat was dry, and her lips were cracked. It had been too long since she had anything to eat or drink. She tried to speak, but only a weak whisper came out. Hello." Silence. Then, the sound of something scraping against the door. A click. A rattle. Her breath hitched. Had her father sent someone to check on her? Or was this her chance to escape? The lock jiggled again, and then light flooded into the room. She winced, covering her eyes. When she finally adjusted, she saw a familiar face staring at her. Her best friend, Noah. His eyes widened in horror as he took in the sight of her. Bruises on her arms, her clothes dirty and torn, her skin pale from being trapped in the dark. "Olivia," he breathed, stepping inside. "What did he do to you?" Tears filled her eyes. She wanted to throw her arms around him, to cry into his shoulder, to tell him everything. But fear held her back. Her voice was hoarse. "You have to go? If he finds you here." Noah shook his head. "I don't care." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a water bottle. "Here, drink this." She hesitated, but then grabbed it, gulping it down so fast she nearly choked. "How did you find me?" she whispered. "I came over to study, but your dad told me you weren't home. He was acting weird." Noah's jaw clenched. "So I waited until he left, then snuck in through the back." Olivia's stomach twisted. If her father found out Noah was here. "We have to go," Noah said firmly. "You can't stay here, Olivia." Panic gripped her. "Noah, he'll find me. He always finds me." "Not this time," Noah promised. He held out his hand. For a moment, she hesitated. Could she really do this? Could she finally break free? Then she remembered the nights she spent locked in the dark. The pain, the fear. This was her only chance. She took his hand. They crept through the basement, up the stairs, and into the hallway. Every sound made Olivia's heart race. Any second now, her father could come home. They made it to the front door. Freedom was just steps away. But then, the sound of tires crunching on gravel. A car door slamming. Footsteps approaching the house. Her father was home. Olivia's blood ran cold. Noah grabbed her wrist. "We have to run. Now." But before they could move, the front door swung open. And there he was. Charles Bennett. His eyes locked onto Olivia. And then, slowly, they shifted to Noah. His expression darkened. "What?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Do you think you're doing?" Olivia felt Noah tense beside her. She knew what was coming. She knew they were in trouble, and there was no way out. It all happened so fast. 1 second, Olivia was frozen in fear. The next, her father lunged forward. Noah reacted first. "Run," he shouted, shoving Olivia toward the door. But Charles was quicker. He grabbed Noah by the collar and yanked him back. Olivia screamed. "No, let him go." Charles's grip tightened. "You think you can just take my daughter away from me?" His voice was ice cold. "You have no idea who you're messing with, boy." Noah struggled, but Charles was stronger. He shoved Noah against the wall, pinning him there. Olivia's mind raced. She had to do something. Her eyes darted to the table near the door, where her father always left his keys. Without thinking, she grabbed them and did the only thing she could. She threw them, straight at her father's face. The keys smacked him in the forehead. He let out a grunt, momentarily stunned. It was just enough time for Noah to break free. "Go!" Noah shouted, grabbing her hand. They bolted out the door. Charles roared behind them. "Olivia, get back here." But she didn't stop. For the first time in her life, she ran. She ran like her life depended on it. Because it did. They didn't stop running until they reached the end of the street. Olivia's chest heaved as she gasped for air. Her legs burned. Noah turned to her, his face filled with concern. "Are you okay?" She nodded, even though she wasn't. Even though she had never been less okay in her life. "What now?" she whispered. Noah hesitated. "We go to the police." Olivia stiffened. "No, we can't." "Olivia, you can't go back there." "I know." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "But you don't understand. He has everyone fooled. No one will believe me." Noah frowned. "Then we make them believe you." She wanted to believe it was that simple. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Her father was powerful, respected. Who would believe the word of a scared teenage girl over a man like him? Still, she couldn't go back. So she made a choice. "We have to leave town," she said. Noah's eyes widened. "What?" "It's the only way." She had no plan, no money, no idea where they would go. But she knew one thing. She would rather take her chances out in the world than spend one more night under her father's roof. Noah studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Let's go." But just as they turned to leave, a police siren blared in the distance, and a familiar black car came speeding down the street. Olivia's heart stopped. Her father had called the police, and they were coming for her. The blaring sirens sent a jolt of fear through Olivia's body. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps as the police car sped toward them. The flashing red and blue lights painted the dark street in streaks of color. Noah grabbed her hand. "We have to go? Now." But it was too late. The police car screeched to a stop in front of them, and two officers jumped out. "Olivia Bennett," one of them called. Her stomach twisted into knots. They weren't here to save her. They were here to take her back. She could see it in their eyes. They weren't looking at her like a victim. They were looking at her like a runaway. A troublemaker. Just like her father had planned. Noah stepped in front of her. "She's not going back with him," he said firmly. The taller officer, a man with tired eyes, frowned. "Son, you don't understand. Her father reported her missing. We're here to bring her home." Home. That word made Olivia feel sick. "That's not my home," she whispered. The officer hesitated. "Miss, I know you're scared, but I'm not going with him," she said, louder this time. She could see the conflict in the officer's face. Maybe, deep down, he knew something wasn't right. But it didn't matter. They had their orders. The second officer, a woman with a sharp gaze, reached for her hand. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you back where you belong." Olivia flinched away. "No, please, you don't understand." A new voice cut through the chaos. "Officer." They all turned. A woman stood on the sidewalk, panting as if she had just run a mile. Her blonde hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her glasses sat crooked on her nose. Miss Carter, Olivia's English teacher. The woman who had always looked at Olivia like she mattered. "Officer, you can't take her back," Miss Carter said, her voice shaking. "She's telling the truth. I've suspected it for a long time. Her father is hurting her." The officers exchanged glances. "You have proof?" the female officer asked. Miss Carter hesitated. "Not yet. But I know Olivia. I've seen the bruises, the way she flinches when someone raises their voice." She turned to Olivia, her eyes filled with determination. "Sweetheart, tell them. Tell them everything." Olivia's throat tightened. This was her chance. She had spent years being too afraid to speak. But now, with Noah beside her and Ms. Carter standing up for her, she felt something stir inside her. Courage. I have proof," Olivia finally said. The officers turned back to her. "My father locks me in the basement," she continued, her voice steadying. "He hurts me when I disobey. He controls everything I do. Please, don't make me go back." The silence that followed was suffocating. The officers studied her, their expressions unreadable. Then, the female officer reached for her radio. "Dispatch, we need Child Protective Services on standby," she said. Olivia's breath caught. They weren't taking her back. For the first time in her life, someone was listening. But before relief could fully sink in, a deep, furious voice shattered the moment. "What the hell is going on here?" Olivia's body went rigid. Her father was here. He stormed toward them, his face twisted in barely contained rage. He wasn't used to losing, and right now, he was losing control of her. "Officer," Charles said, forcing a smile. "I'm sorry about this. My daughter has a habit of making up wild stories. You understand, don't you?" The taller officer narrowed his eyes. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions." "Questions?" Charles let out a short, humorless laugh. "This is ridiculous. She's my daughter. I have the right to take her home." Noah clenched his fists. "You don't have the right to hurt her." Charles turned to him, his face darkening. "Watch yourself, boy." "Sir," the female officer interrupted, stepping between them. "We're placing Olivia in temporary protective custody until an investigation is completed." Charles's smile vanished. "You can't do that." "Actually, we can." For the first time, real panic flickered in his eyes. He wasn't in control anymore, and he knew it. Olivia felt a rush of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. But she should have known better than to think it was over. Because in the next moment, Charles did something no one expected. He lunged for her. "No." Noah grabbed her just in time, pulling her back. The officers moved fast, tackling Charles to the ground. He fought them, thrashing and cursing, but they pinned him down. "You're making a mistake," he roared. "She's lying. She's my daughter." But Olivia wasn't scared anymore. For the first time, she looked him in the eye and said the words she had been too afraid to say for years. "You don't own me." His eyes burned with fury, but he couldn't touch her now. He had lost, and she had won. Hours later, Olivia sat in a small office at the police station. A social worker named Mrs. Hayes sat across from her, a warm but serious expression on her face. "You're safe now, Olivia," she said gently. Safe. The word felt foreign. Unreal. "Where will I go?" Olivia asked. Mrs. Hayes sighed. We're looking into options. But for now, you'll stay in a temporary home. Olivia nodded numbly. She should have been relieved. So why did she still feel so lost? As if sensing her thoughts, Noah reached over and squeezed her hand. You're not alone, he whispered. She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. For the first time in years, she believed him. But just as she allowed herself to breathe, the door burst open. A police officer walked in, his face grim. You need to see this, he said. Mrs. Hayes frowned. What is it? The officer hesitated. Then, he held up a folder. Inside was something that made Olivia's blood run cold. Something that changed everything. Her father's secrets ran deeper than she ever could have imagined. And this was just the beginning. Mrs. Hayes reached for the folder, flipping it open. The moment her eyes scanned the first page, her expression hardened. Olivia leaned forward, her heart pounding. What is it? The officer hesitated. We've been looking into your father's records, Olivia, and we found things. Mrs. Hayes turned a page, her lips pressing into a thin line. Very disturbing things. Olivia's stomach twisted. What do you mean? The officer took a deep breath. Your father isn't just an abusive man. He's been hiding things, big things. And we think you might be in more danger than we realized. Olivia's hands clenched into fists. Danger? From what? The officer exhaled, then slid a photo across the table. It was a grainy image of a warehouse. Late at night, several men standing in the shadows. And there, right in the middle, was her father, Charles Bennett, shaking hands with someone who looked dangerous. Cold fear wrapped around Olivia's spine. Who is that man? She whispered. The officer's jaw tightened. His name is Robert Slate. He's a known criminal. A man with a long history of. He stopped, choosing his words carefully. Bad things. Drug trafficking. Money laundering. Violence. Olivia's blood turned to ice. Her father was involved with criminals? But the officer wasn't done. This isn't just one meeting, he continued. We have records of your father's connection to illegal businesses. Secret bank accounts. Offshore investments. Mrs. Hayes closed the folder and looked at Olivia with an unreadable expression. Sweetheart, your father isn't just a bad man. He's dangerous. Very dangerous. Olivia felt the room spinning. She had spent her whole life fearing her father, but she had no idea he was capable of this. But, she shook her head, trying to make sense of it. But why does this matter now? He's in custody, right? The officer hesitated. Mrs. Hayes sighed. He made bail, Olivia. The words slammed into her like a truck. Bail, she choked. You let him go? We didn't let him go, the officer said quickly. Someone paid for his release. And we think we know who. He flipped another page in the folder, revealing a bank transaction. $1 million. Transferred by Slate Industries. Olivia's heart nearly stopped. Robert Slate bailed out her father. Why would he do that? Noah spoke for the first time, his voice filled with unease. The officer leaned forward. Because, son, we think your father knows something that Slate doesn't want getting out. Olivia's hands trembled. This wasn't just about abuse anymore. This was bigger. Much bigger. Mrs. Hayes placed a gentle hand on Olivia's shoulder. Sweetheart, we're moving you somewhere safer. Somewhere he can't find you. But Olivia barely heard her. Her mind was spinning. Her father was out there. And if he had people like Robert Slate backing him up, he wasn't going to stop. He was coming for her. The next 24 hours were a blur. The police escorted Olivia to a safe house, a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of town. It wasn't exactly comforting, but at least it was far away from her father. Noah insisted on coming with her. He refused to leave her side, no matter how many times the officers told him he didn't have to stay. You're stuck with me, he had said, flashing his usual grin. Deal with it. She had never been more grateful for him. But even inside the safe house, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The police assured her that no one knew where she was. But something felt wrong. Late that night, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the window. She should feel safer. But she didn't. Because deep down she knew. Her father wasn't done with her. And she was right. Because just before dawn, a loud crash shattered the silence. The front door exploded open. Heavy footsteps pounded against the floor. Shouts filled the air. Noah jolted awake beside her. What was that? Before Olivia could answer, the bedroom door burst open. A man stood there, dressed in all black. A ski mask covering his face. A gun in his hand. Olivia's blood ran cold. She barely had time to react before the man lunged forward. And everything went black. Olivia's world was spinning. She felt weightless, her mind drifting in and out of consciousness. There was a ringing in her ears, a dull ache in the back of her head. The last thing she remembered was the masked man lunging toward her, then nothing. Now, as her vision slowly cleared, she realized she wasn't in the safe house anymore. She was in a moving vehicle. Her hands were bound. Her mouth was covered with duct tape. Panic surged through her veins. She struggled, twisting her wrists, but the ropes were too tight. She forced herself to breathe. Think, Olivia. Think. Where was Noah? Was he okay? She turned her head, searching, and there he was, sitting beside her, his head slumped forward, unconscious. His hands were tied too. A small cut on his forehead dripped blood onto his shirt. Olivia's stomach clenched. Then, a deep voice snapped her attention forward. She's awake. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror. His face was shadowed, but his voice was rough, cold. Took her long enough. The man in the passenger seat chuckled. She's tougher than she looks. Olivia's pulse pounded. Who were they? Where were they taking her? And most importantly, was her father behind this? She thought of the police, of Mrs. Hayes, of the officers who had promised she was safe. They were wrong. She wasn't safe. She was in more danger than ever. The van rumbled down a dark road. No streetlights. No signs. Just endless blackness. Olivia's mind raced. I have to get out of here. But how? The men were armed. Noah was unconscious. She was tied up. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly helpless. Then, a voice crackled through the men's radio. Bring her to the warehouse. Her heart stopped. The warehouse. The same one in the photo. The one her father had been seen in. Terror shot through her veins. She knew what this meant. She wasn't being kidnapped by strangers. This was connected to her father, and whatever was waiting for her at that warehouse. It wasn't good. The van screeched to a stop. Olivia's body jerked forward as the doors swung open. The men grabbed her, yanking her out. She hit the ground hard, her knees scraping against the cold concrete. A pair of heavy boots stopped inches from her face. Well. The voice was smooth, amused. Olivia's blood turned to ice. She forced herself to look up, and there he was, Robert Slate, the man her father had been doing business with. He was taller than she expected, broad shoulders, sharp eyes that gleamed under the dim warehouse lights. He crouched down, tilting his head as he studied her. You're a pretty little thing, he mused. I can see why your father is so desperate to get you back. Olivia's stomach churned. He knew her father. He was working with him. Take the tape off, Slate ordered. One of the men ripped it from her mouth. Olivia gasped, her lips burning. She glared at Slate. What do you want? Slate smirked. Not what, sweetheart? Who? He straightened, sliding his hands into his pockets. Your father is a useful man, but he made a mistake. A big one. Olivia swallowed hard. What mistake? Slate's smirk faded. He stole from me. The words echoed in the empty warehouse. He thought I wouldn't notice, Slate continued, pacing in front of her. Thought he could skim a little off the top and get away with it. But here's the thing, Olivia, nobody steals from me. Olivia's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Her father stole from Slate, and now Slate wanted revenge. She didn't know much about criminals, but she knew one thing. Men like Robert Slate didn't forgive. She forced herself to stay calm. So why take me? Slate stopped pacing. He turned to her, a slow smile stretching across his face. Because your father loves money more than anything. More than business. More than loyalty. He crouched again, his eyes dark. More than you. Olivia's breath caught. He leaned closer. So let's see what he's willing to pay to get you back. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about leverage. A ransom. She was being used as bait. And the worst part? She wasn't even sure her father would pay for her. A groan snapped her attention to the side. Noah was waking up. His head lolled forward, his eyes dazed. Olivia. His voice was rough, weak. Slate clicked his tongue. Ah, the boyfriend's awake. Noah lifted his head, taking in the scene. His eyes locked onto Slate, then flickered to Olivia. And in that moment, she saw it. A silent understanding between them. We have to get out of here. But how? Their hands were still tied. The warehouse was full of Slate's men. Escape was impossible. Unless. Olivia took a shaky breath. There was only one thing left to do. She had to outsmart them. She turned to Slate, forcing her voice to be steady. You think my father will pay for me? Slate raised an eyebrow. Oh, I know he will. Olivia let out a sharp laugh. Then you don't know my father at all. Slate's eyes darkened. Explain. She tilted her chin up, pretending she wasn't shaking inside. My father is a liar. A coward. And if you think he's going to hand over a fortune just to save me. She smirked. You're a bigger fool than he is. Slate's jaw tightened. His men shifted uncomfortably. She's bluffing, one of them muttered. But was she? Slate studied her, his eyes narrowing. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Olivia saw it. Doubt. A sliver of hesitation. And that was all she needed. She just had to push him further. She leaned in, lowering her voice. You made a mistake, Slate. You should have gone after my father. Not me. Slate's jaw ticked. For the first time, he looked unsure. And that meant one thing. Olivia had just turned the tables. Now all she had to do was find a way to escape, before it was too late. Slate's jaw tightened as he studied Olivia. She could see the conflict in his eyes. Was she bluffing? Was she really that worthless to her father? She had to keep pushing. Think about it. Olivia continued, her voice calm but firm. If my father really cared about me, I wouldn't be here. He wouldn't have let me suffer all those years. He wouldn't have hurt me. She tilted her head. Do you honestly believe he's going to pay you what you want? Slate's lips pressed together. His men exchanged uncertain glances. Boss, one of them muttered. What if she's right? Slate shot him a glare, silencing him instantly. But Olivia saw it. Doubt. Good. She had his attention. Now she needed to take control. You need leverage, she said, keeping her tone steady. But you picked the wrong person. I'm not my father's weakness. She glanced at Noah. I'm his mistake. Noah tensed beside her. She could feel his eyes on her, but she kept her focus on Slate. You think he's going to empty his bank account for me? Olivia let out a dry laugh. He'd rather kill me himself than lose a cent of his money. Slate's fingers twitched. Olivia knew she was walking a dangerous line. If she convinced him she was worthless, he might decide she wasn't worth keeping alive. She needed to give him a reason to keep her breathing. She took a deep breath. Here goes nothing. But I know something you don't. That got his attention. Slate's sharp eyes locked onto her. What? Olivia forced a smirk. I know where he's hiding his money. Silence. Even Noah looked at her in surprise. Slate's expression turned unreadable. You're lying. Am I? Olivia shrugged, despite the ropes digging into her wrists. Ask yourself this. If my father's been stealing from you, where do you think he's hiding it? Slate didn't respond. She leaned forward slightly. He trusts me more than you think. He talks to himself when he drinks. Leaves documents lying around the house. I know things. Things that could hurt him. Slate didn't move. But his eyes, his calculating, dangerous eyes, told her everything she needed to know. She had him. You want your money? Olivia pressed. Let me go, and I'll tell you where it is. Slate's men shifted, whispering amongst themselves. The one who had doubted her earlier spoke up again. Boss, what if she's telling the truth? Slate remained silent. Then, without warning, he grabbed Olivia's chin, forcing her to look up at him. Her pulse pounded, but she didn't flinch. If you're lying to me, Slate said, his voice deadly quiet, I will make you regret it. Olivia forced herself to smirk. Then I guess we better hope I'm telling the truth. Slate studied her for another long moment. Then he released her. Cut them loose. Olivia barely had time to react before one of Slate's men pulled out a knife and sliced the ropes around her wrists. The blood rushed back into her hands, sending a wave of painful tingles up her arms. Noah grunted as his own restraints were cut. The moment he was free, he moved closer to Olivia, his fingers brushing against hers in silent reassurance. Slate crossed his arms. All right, princess. Talk. Olivia took a deep breath. Now came the real challenge. She had to give him something. Something big enough to keep him interested, but not enough to actually help him. And she had to do it without getting herself killed. She licked her lips. My father keeps a separate account. Offshore. But it's not under his name. It's under a fake identity. Slate narrowed his eyes. Go on. Olivia thought fast. She had once overheard her father muttering about an account in the Cayman Islands. She didn't know the details, but she couldn't let Slate know that. She straightened. It's in the Caymans. Under the name James Holloway. Slate didn't blink. One of his men pulled out a phone and started typing. A few seconds later, he looked up. Boss, there's actually an account under that name. Olivia forced herself not to react. It was a guess. A lucky one. Slate smirked. Well, Looks like you just became useful. Olivia swallowed hard. She wasn't out of danger yet. Take them with us, Slate ordered. Noah stiffened. Wait, what? Slate glanced at him. Did you really think I was just gonna let you two walk out of here? He chuckled darkly. No, no. You're coming with us. If you're lying. He turned back to Olivia, his expression cold. You both die. A chill ran down Olivia's spine. She had won a small battle, but the war was far from over. They were shoved into another car, this one sleeker, darker. Slate sat in the front, his men on either side. The car sped through the night, heading towards something Olivia didn't want to face. Noah leaned in close, his voice barely a whisper. What are you doing? Buying us time, Olivia murmured. Noah's jaw clenched. You don't actually know where the money is, do you? She shook her head. No. Noah exhaled sharply. Then how are we supposed to get out of this? Olivia stared at the passing streetlights. There was only one way out. They had to escape, and they had to do it before they reached their destination. She turned to Noah, her mind racing. Can you fight? He blinked. What? If I create a distraction, can you take one of them down? Noah hesitated, then gave a slow nod. I wrestled in middle school. That's not comforting, Olivia muttered. But it would have to do. She inhaled deeply, bracing herself. The second the car slowed down, she was going to make her move. And pray to God it worked. Because if it didn't, they were dead. The car sped down the deserted highway, the tires humming against the pavement. Olivia could see the faint glow of city lights in the distance, but it wasn't close enough. Not yet. Noah sat stiffly beside her, his fists clenched. His eyes darted toward the two men sitting in the back seat with them, both large, both armed. Slate sat in the front, completely at ease, as if he had already won. But Olivia wasn't giving up. She counted the seconds. The moment the car slowed down, that was when she had to act. She glanced at Noah. His breathing was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. He was ready. She just had to make the first move. Think, Olivia. Think. Then, the car jerked slightly as it approached a turn. Her chance. Olivia didn't hesitate. She threw herself forward, slamming into the man beside her. He grunted in surprise, his gun slipping from his grip. Before he could react, she bit down hard on his arm. He screamed. Everything exploded into chaos. Noah lunged at the other man, driving his elbow into his throat. The man choked, reaching for his weapon, but Noah was faster. He grabbed the gun and smashed it against the side of his attacker's head. The car swerved. What the? Slate roared from the front. Olivia didn't wait. She grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. Wind rushed in, slamming against her face. The ground outside blurred past at terrifying speed. Jumping out at this speed was suicide, but slowing down wasn't an option. She turned to Noah, now, and shoved herself out of the car. The world spun. She hit the pavement hard, rolling, skidding, pain exploding across her skin. The asphalt tore through her clothes, burning her arms and legs. A second later, Noah hit the ground beside her. The car screeched to a halt. Slate screamed in fury. Get them! Olivia ignored the pain and ran. Noah staggered beside her, limping, but he didn't stop either. The road stretched out in front of them. Nothing but open land, scattered trees, and the faint glow of a gas station in the distance. There! Olivia gasped, pointing. They sprinted toward the station, their lungs burning, their feet barely touching the ground. Behind them, Slate's men gave chase. Olivia didn't look back. She couldn't. If they got caught, they were dead. Keep running. Keep running. The gas station was getting closer. 50 feet. 40. 30. Gunshots rang out. Olivia screamed as a bullet whizzed past her ear. A worker inside the gas station looked up, his eyes widening in shock. Noah burst through the doors first, grabbing onto a shelf to keep from collapsing. Olivia stumbled in after him, nearly falling. Help, she gasped. Call the police. The worker, an older man with graying hair, stood frozen for a second. Then, he saw the men chasing them. Without hesitation, he grabbed a shotgun from beneath the counter. Get out, he roared. Slate's men skidded to a stop outside. One of them raised his gun, but the worker cocked the shotgun. I said get out. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Slate's men ran. Olivia collapsed against the counter, gasping for breath. They had escaped, but they weren't safe yet, because Slate wasn't the kind of man who let people go. And Olivia knew, deep in her gut, this wasn't over. Not even close. 20 minutes later, The gas station was swarmed with police cars. An officer named Detective Monroe, a tall, grizzled man with tired eyes, stood in front of Olivia and Noah, his hands on his hips. "Start from the beginning," he said. Olivia's voice trembled as she told him everything. Her father, the abuse, the police failing to protect her, the kidnapping, Slate, the money. Monroe listened silently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he exhaled sharply. "Jesus Christ." Noah clenched his fists. "We need protection." "You'll get it," Monroe assured him. "But Olivia, this just became bigger than you. If Slate is laundering money through your father, this could lead to an entire criminal network." Olivia swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" Monroe hesitated. Then, he crouched down in front of her, his voice firm. "We fight back." Olivia stared at Detective Monroe, her heart pounding. Fight back? She had spent her entire life running. From her father. From fear. From the pain that had controlled her every move. Now this man was telling her she had to fight back? She swallowed hard. "How?" Monroe leaned forward, his gaze serious. "By helping us take down Slate and your father." The words sent a chill through Olivia's body. "Wait." Noah cut in, shaking his head. "You want Olivia to go up against Slate? After what just happened?" His voice was tight with anger. "Are you insane?" Monroe sighed. "Look, kid, I get it. But this isn't just about Olivia anymore. This is bigger than her. Bigger than all of us." He looked back at Olivia. "Your father is connected to something dangerous. If we don't stop this now, more people are going to get hurt." Olivia's stomach twisted. She knew he was right. But she wasn't a cop. She wasn't a fighter. She was just a girl who had barely escaped with her life. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. Monroe studied her for a long moment. Then, he leaned in, his voice softer. "Olivia, you've already done more than most people would. You survived him. That takes strength. Now, we need that strength to make sure no one else goes through what you did." A lump formed in Olivia's throat. Could she really do this? Take down her own father? Noah reached for her hand. "You don't have to do this alone." Olivia looked at him, at the bruises on his face, at the determination in his eyes. She took a deep breath. "No more running." She turned to Monroe and nodded. "What do I have to do?" 3 hours later, Olivia sat in a secure, safe house, surrounded by police officers and federal agents. Maps and documents covered the table, all leading back to Slate and her father. Monroe placed a folder in front of her. "This is everything we have on your dad." Olivia hesitated before flipping it open, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Dozens of bank accounts, secret properties, hidden connections to crime rings. Her father wasn't just involved with Slate. He was one of the key players. Noah cursed under his breath. "Jesus, he's been doing this for years." Olivia clenched her fists. All this time, she had been afraid of him. But he was just a man. A cruel, selfish man who thought he was untouchable. Monroe tapped a specific document. "We have enough to arrest him. But if we want to take down Slate too, we need something bigger. Something that ties them both to a crime we can prove in court." Olivia frowned. "Like what?" Monroe exhaled. "We need someone to bait him into making a mistake." Olivia's pulse spiked. Noah stiffened. "No, absolutely not." But Monroe didn't back down. "She's the only one he'll trust enough to meet face to face." "You want her to meet with him?" Noah exploded. "After everything he's done? That's suicide." Monroe held up a hand. "She wouldn't be alone. We'd wire her up. Get everything on tape. The second he confesses, we move in." Olivia's skin felt ice cold. The idea of seeing her father again, of facing him after all these years, made her feel like she couldn't breathe. But then she thought of the warehouse. The bruises. The fear. The nights locked in the dark. She couldn't let him do this to anyone else. She straightened. "I'll do it." Noah turned to her, eyes wide. "Liv, no. I have to." She met his gaze, willing him to understand. "I won't let him get away with this." Noah clenched his jaw but didn't argue. Monroe nodded. "All right, let's take him down." The plan was simple, but the risk was deadly. Olivia would call her father, pretend she was scared, tell him she wanted to come home. They'd set up a meeting spot. The second he admitted to working with Slate, the police would move in. But if anything went wrong, she would be alone. Olivia sat in the dimly lit room, staring at the burner phone in her hands. It was time. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number. The line rang. Once. Twice. Then, "Olivia." Her father's voice sent a shockwave of terror through her body, but she forced herself to sound small. Weak. Dad, she whispered. I messed up. I need help. Silence. Then, his voice softened. Where are you, sweetheart? She squeezed her eyes shut. Liar. I'm scared, she continued, adding a shaky breath. The cops don't believe me. I don't know who to trust anymore. A pause. Then, you did the right thing calling me, her father said smoothly. I'll take care of everything. Just tell me where you are. Olivia met Monroe's gaze. He gave her a slight nod. She took a deep breath. Meet me at Ridgewood Park. The old bridge. Another pause. Then, of course, sweetheart. Click. The line went dead. Olivia's hands shook as she set the phone down. Noah grabbed her wrist. It's a trap, he muttered. He's going to try and take you. She swallowed hard. I know. Monroe checked his watch. We move in 30 minutes. Olivia exhaled slowly. This was it. The final fight. In one way or another. It was going to end tonight. The night air was crisp, the wind whispering through the trees as Olivia stood beneath the dim glow of the street lamp near the Ridgewood Park Bridge. Her heart thundered inside her chest, her pulse loud in her ears. This was it. The final trap. She forced herself to breathe, her fingers tightening around the small microphone hidden beneath her hoodie. Every word she spoke was being transmitted to Monroe and his team, who were stationed nearby, waiting for her father to make a move. Noah was furious that she was doing this. He had begged her not to come, had tried to convince Monroe to send someone else. But Olivia knew her father wouldn't fall for a trap unless he believed she was truly alone. So now she stood there, vulnerable, exposed, waiting. And then, the sound of footsteps. She froze, every muscle in her body locking up. Slowly, out of the darkness, he emerged. Charles Bennett. He was dressed in his usual expensive suit, his tie perfectly in place, as if this were just another business meeting. His hair was slicked back, his expression unreadable. But his eyes were filled with something dark, something dangerous. Olivia fought the urge to run. Olivia, he said smoothly, his voice as gentle as silk. Sweetheart, you look exhausted. I'm so sorry they put you through all this. Her stomach twisted. This was what he always did, played the role of the loving father, the caring man. A liar. She swallowed hard. Dad. She let her voice tremble. I didn't know who else to call. His smile widened. Of course you called me, he said, stepping closer. You're my daughter. And a father always protects his little girl. Olivia clenched her fists. Protect? Was that what he called locking her in basements? Breaking her down until she was too scared to fight back? She forced herself to keep the act going. I don't know what to do, she whispered. The cops, they think you're dangerous. Her father sighed, as if the entire situation was nothing more than an inconvenience. They're fools, Olivia. They don't understand how much I've sacrificed for us. But it doesn't matter anymore. We can leave all of this behind. Olivia's breath caught. Leave? Her father took another step toward her, his voice softer. You and me. We can disappear. I have money. A new identity. No more hiding, sweetheart. No more fear. You just have to trust me. Her body went cold. He wasn't just trying to escape the law. He was trying to take her with him. She forced herself to keep her breathing steady. I don't understand. I thought you were working with Slate. Her father's smile faded. Just for a second. Then, he let out a soft chuckle. I worked with Slate because I had no choice. But he's nothing, Olivia. A man like him, he's disposable. Her stomach clenched. That was it. That was the confession Monroe needed. She reached up, subtly adjusting her hoodie, making sure the microphone caught every word. Her father's eyes narrowed. Olivia, you trust me, don't you? She hesitated. Just for a moment. And that was all he needed. His expression changed in an instant. The warmth disappeared. The mask fell. And suddenly, he was reaching for her. She barely had time to react. A sharp yank, and she was trapped in his grip. You really think I don't know what you're doing? He hissed in her ear. Olivia gasped, struggling, but his hold was iron strong. Did you really think you could outsmart me? His breath was hot against her skin. You're just a scared little girl. You always have been. A gun pressed against her ribs. Panic slammed into her chest. Where was Monroe? Where were the cops? You're coming with me, her father whispered. And if you make a sound, I pull the trigger. Tears burned in Olivia's eyes. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had played the game. She had gotten the confession. So where were they? Then, A sudden shout, and chaos erupted. Drop the weapon. Flashing red and blue lights flooded the park as Monroe and his team swarmed in. Olivia's father snarled, yanking her back, using her as a human shield. I said stay back, he bellowed, his grip tightening. The gun dug into her side. Monroe's gun was raised. It's over, Bennett. Let her go. Olivia's heart pounded. This was it. Her father was trapped. But instead of surrendering, his grip tightened, his jaw clenched, and Olivia realized he wasn't going to let her go. He would rather die than be taken alive. She had one chance, 1 second to act. She took a deep breath, and then she stomped down hard on his foot. Her father grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough. She twisted free. Monroe fired. The bullet hit its mark. Her father collapsed, his gun clattering to the ground. Everything went silent. For the first time in her life, her father couldn't hurt her anymore. She stood there, gasping, shaking. It was over. She was free. But even as Monroe cuffed Charles Bennett's limp, bleeding form, even as Noah rushed to her side, holding her close, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling. Because she knew Slate was still out there. And this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the cold pavement, painting the night in streaks of color. Olivia stood frozen, her breath coming in shaky gasps. Her father was lying on the ground, his hands cuffed behind his back, blood seeping from the bullet wound in his shoulder. His once powerful presence was reduced to nothing. It was over. He had lost. She should have felt relief. But all she felt was emptiness. Noah's warm hand wrapped around hers, grounding her. Olivia, it's done. You're safe now. Safe. Was she? She wanted to believe it. But something dark still lingered inside her. Her father was going to prison. But Slate was still out there. And if there was one thing she had learned, monsters like him didn't let things go. Detective Monroe approached, his face unreadable. You did good, kid. Olivia forced herself to look up at him. Is he going to prison? Monroe nodded. With the confession we got from him tonight, he's not getting out of this one. Olivia exhaled. It was really over. The nightmare was ending. But then, Monroe's radio crackled. A voice on the other end spoke quickly, urgency laced in every word. Sir, we have a problem. Monroe's expression darkened. Go ahead. There was a brief silence. Then, Slate is gone. Olivia's heart stopped. Gone. No. He was spotted leaving town 15 minutes ago. The officer on the radio continued. By the time we got to his safe house, it was empty. He's off the grid. A cold wave of dread crashed over Olivia. Slate knew. He knew her father had been arrested. And he was running. Monroe cursed under his breath. Damn it. He turned to Olivia. He's going into hiding. But make no mistake, he's going to come back. Olivia's pulse pounded. She knew Slate wasn't the type of man to forgive. And now, he had nothing left to lose. She swallowed hard. What do we do? Monroe's jaw tightened. We track him down. Before he finds you first. Olivia's stomach twisted. Slate wouldn't just come after her. He would come after Noah. After anyone she cared about. And the worst part? She had no idea when. Or how. But she knew one thing. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. 2 days later, the courtroom was silent. A different kind of silence than Olivia had ever known. Not the silence of fear. Not the silence of being locked away. This was the silence of justice. She sat stiffly in the witness stand, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Every breath felt heavy, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Across the courtroom, her father sat in handcuffs, his face expressionless. He refused to look at her. Fine. She didn't need him to. Because today, he had to listen. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with a commanding presence, nodded at her. You may proceed, Miss Bennett. Olivia took a deep breath. And then, she spoke. She told them everything. The beatings. The nights in the basement. The way her father had made her feel like she was nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She stood there, telling her story, her voice steady and strong. And as she spoke, something happened. Something no one had ever seen before. The judge, the woman who had presided over hundreds of cases, who had seen the worst of humanity, who was known for being unshakable. Her eyes filled with tears. The courtroom gasped. But Olivia didn't stop. She looked directly at her father, the man who had terrorized her for years, and she said the words she had always been too afraid to say. You don't own me anymore. For the first time, She saw something in her father's eyes. Not rage. Not power. Defeat. He had lost. And Olivia? She had won. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps. Cameras flashed. People whispered. But Olivia barely noticed. She stepped out into the sunlight, breathing in freedom for the first time. Noah was waiting for her, hands in his pockets. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." Noah studied her for a moment, then smirked. "You know, I was thinking, maybe you should consider law school. After today, I think you could take on the whole system." Olivia laughed. A real laugh. One she hadn't felt in a long time. "Maybe," she said. "But first, I think I just want to be me." For the first time in years, she was free. But deep down, she knew Slate was still out there, watching, waiting, and one day he would come back. But when he did, she wouldn't be that scared little girl anymore. She would be ready. The sun hung low in the sky as Olivia walked down the courthouse steps, her heart still hammering in her chest. The weight of what had just happened, of what she had done, felt like a storm inside her. Her father was gone, locked away, but the danger wasn't over. Noah walked beside her, his hands shoved into his hoodie pockets. That was intense. Olivia let out a shaky breath. Yeah, she could still see the look in her father's eyes when the judge read the verdict. The moment he realized he wasn't in control anymore. But instead of relief, all Olivia felt was a strange, twisting fear. Because Slate was still out there. And she knew he wasn't going to let this go. As they reached the parking lot, Detective Monroe leaned against his car, arms crossed. His usual no-nonsense expression was in place, but there was something harder in his eyes. "You did good in there," he said. Olivia managed a small nod. "Thanks." Noah frowned. "What happens next?" Monroe's expression darkened. "Now? We go after Slate." Olivia's stomach twisted. Slate was smart. Careful. He had disappeared before the police could catch him, but he wouldn't stay hidden forever. He was planning something. And Olivia knew. She was at the center of it. Monroe exhaled. "We've tracked some of his associates. There's been movement in the city. If he comes back, we'll be ready." Noah crossed his arms. "And what about Olivia?" Monroe's gaze flickered to her. "She stays in protective custody until we get him." Olivia's gut clenched. "How long?" she asked. Monroe sighed. "As long as it takes." She bit her lip. She wasn't free yet. She was still running. Noah stepped closer. "And if he finds her first?" Monroe's eyes hardened. "He won't." But Olivia wasn't so sure. Because deep down, she felt it. Slate wasn't done. And soon, he was going to make his move. That night, Olivia sat in a small, dimly lit safe house, staring at the ceiling. Everything felt wrong. She should have felt relief. Her father was behind bars. She had survived. But instead, all she felt was unease. A storm was coming. Noah sat beside her on the couch, flipping a pen between his fingers. He had refused to leave, despite Monroe's protests. "Why do you look like you're planning something stupid?" he muttered. Olivia turned to him, lips pressed together. "What if I don't want to hide?" she said quietly. Noah's hand froze mid-spin. "Live." His voice was cautious. "What are you saying?" She took a deep breath. "Slate isn't going to stop. If I keep running, I'll never be free. The only way this ends is if we stop him first." Noah stared at her like she had lost her mind. "That's insane," he said. "Slate is dangerous, Olivia. He has killers working for him. What do you think you're going to do? Walk up to him and ask nicely for him to leave you alone?" Her jaw tightened. "No, but we know his weakness." Noah scoffed. "And what's that?" She leaned in. "Money." Noah blinked. And then, understanding dawned in his eyes. "You want to take his operation down," he said slowly. She nodded. Noah exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You're insane." Olivia smirked. "Yeah, but are you in?" He groaned. "I hate that I'm saying this, but yeah, I'm in." She grinned. Because for the first time, she wasn't running. She was fighting back. 2 days later, the streets of Chicago were alive with movement. Cars honking, people shouting, the pulse of the city beating beneath Olivia's feet. She and Noah walked side by side, disguised in hoodies and caps, blending into the crowd. Their target? A high-end club on the north side of town, a known front for Slate's money laundering. Monroe had warned them not to do this. But Olivia wasn't waiting anymore. She and Noah slipped into a coffee shop across the street, taking a seat by the window. "All right," Noah muttered, pulling out his phone. "Tell me the plan again, so I can officially tell you how stupid it is." Olivia rolled her eyes. We get in, find something we can use against Slate, and get out. Noah raised an eyebrow. And how exactly are we getting in? Because last time I checked, we don't have VIP passes. Olivia smirked. That's where the fun begins. An hour later, Olivia stood at the entrance of the Diamond Club, her heart pounding. The bouncer, a massive man with a bald head and a scar across his cheek, eyed her suspiciously. You're not on the list, he grunted. Olivia flashed a sweet smile. I think I am. She slid a $100 bill into his palm. The bouncer smirked. Go ahead. Noah, standing beside her, let out a low whistle. Well, that was easy. She nudged him. Don't jinx it. They slipped inside. The club was lavish. Chandeliers hanging low, velvet booths lining the walls, the scent of expensive liquor heavy in the air. And at the far end of the room, sitting in a private booth, was a familiar face. A man Olivia recognized from the warehouse. One of Slate's men. Noah followed her gaze. Okay, now what? Olivia took a deep breath. Now, she whispered. We get close enough to hear something they don't want us to know. But before they could move, a voice cut through the air. Well, look who finally came out of hiding. Olivia's blood turned to ice. Slowly, she turned around. And there, standing just a few feet away, watching her with cold amusement, was Robert Slate. He had found her first. The music in the Diamond Club throbbed in the background, but Olivia barely heard it. Slate stood in front of her, his sharp eyes gleaming with amusement. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, a drink in his hand, completely at ease. Like he had been waiting for her. Noah tensed beside her. Olivia. Slate held up a hand. Relax, kid. If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it past the door. A slow smile curved his lips. But I have to admit, I'm impressed. He tilted his head, studying Olivia. Walking right into my club? That takes guts. Olivia forced herself to stay calm. She had expected to find Slate's men here. She hadn't expected Slate himself. But she wouldn't back down now. She straightened. I'm not afraid of you. Slate chuckled. You should be. He took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze never leaving hers. Tell me something, Olivia, what exactly is your plan here? You think you're going to take me down? Her heart pounded. Yes, that was exactly what she planned to do. But she couldn't let him see her fear. She smirked. I don't need to take you down. You're doing that all by yourself. Slate's eyes darkened. For the first time, amusement flickered into something dangerous. You've got spirit, he admitted. But let me make something clear. He leaned in, lowering his voice. I don't lose. Olivia refused to back away. Neither do I. Their eyes locked. A challenge. A warning. Noah stepped in. You sure talk a big game, but you're looking pretty desperate right now. Slate exhaled, shaking his head. You kids have no idea who you're messing with. Then, he glanced at his watch and smiled. Actually, his voice was smooth. You might want to check your little detective friend's radio right about now. Olivia's blood ran cold. Monroe. Her hands clenched into fists. What did you do? Slate only grinned. Before Olivia could react, her phone buzzed. She yanked it out of her pocket, Monroe's number flashing across the screen. She answered. Detective. His voice was urgent. Olivia, get out of there now. Then, gunfire erupted in the background. Her stomach dropped. Slate's men were attacking Monroe's team. This wasn't a trap for Slate. This was a trap for them. Slate took a slow step back, raising his hands. Oops. Looks like you underestimated me. Then, before Olivia could stop him, the lights in the club cut out. Total darkness. And the next thing she heard, gunshots, screams, chaos. The world erupted. Shadows moved in every direction. The flashes of gunfire illuminated Slate's men spreading out, weapons drawn. Noah grabbed Olivia's arm. We need to move, now. She didn't hesitate. They ran, dodging through the panicked crowd, weaving through overturned tables and shattered glass. Slate's voice boomed over the chaos. Find them. Olivia's pulse roared in her ears. They reached a back hallway. A single neon exit sign glowed above a door at the end. Almost there. Noah panted. But then, a shadow stepped in front of them. One of Slate's men. Gun raised. Not so fast. Olivia's heart stopped. The man pulled the trigger. Bang. Noah shoved Olivia aside. The bullet whizzed past his shoulder, barely missing him. He didn't stop. Didn't hesitate. He tackled the man. They hit the ground hard, struggling. Olivia scrambled to her feet, her eyes darting around for something, anything. Her gaze landed on a broken glass bottle. She grabbed it, and without thinking, she swung. The bottle shattered against the man's head. He collapsed. Noah gasped for breath, rolling off him. That was awesome, he wheezed. Olivia didn't have time to celebrate. Come on. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the exit. They burst outside. Cold air. Freedom. But they weren't safe yet. Because just as they started running, a black SUV screeched into the alley. Slate. His face was calm. His eyes were cold. And in his hand, a gun. He raised it and aimed at Olivia. Her breath caught. This was it. She wasn't fast enough. The gun fired. Bang. But the bullet never hit her. Because someone stepped in front of her. Monroe. The detective staggered, a pained grunt escaping his lips as he collapsed to his knees. Monroe. Olivia screamed. Slate didn't react. He simply cocked his gun again. Shame, he muttered. Guess I'll have to finish the job. But before he could fire, more sirens, more gunfire. And then, a sniper shot rang out. Slate's body jerked. His gun clattered to the ground. He staggered, his face contorted in shock. And then, he fell, motionless. The cops had arrived. The nightmare was over. Hours later, Olivia sat outside the hospital room, her hands trembling in her lap. Noah sat beside her, his arm in a sling. Monroe's gonna be okay, he said softly. They said he'll pull through. Olivia exhaled. Relief crashed over her so hard. She almost cried. Noah nudged her. You did it, Liv. She blinked. We did it. The weight in her chest. The fear that had haunted her for years. It was finally gone. She looked up at Noah, a small smile forming. So, he smirked. What now? Olivia thought for a moment. Then, she grinned. Now, she leaned back against the chair. I finally get to live. For the first time in forever. She was free.